At exactly 6:17 hours local time, the eastern districts of Kupiansk were coming apart under sustained fire. Russian 152mm artillery had been working the area relentlessly, slamming shell after shell into the neighborhood for nearly 12 minutes. Deep in a reinforced basement, Ukrainian soldiers pressed themselves into the concrete as dust thickened the air, and every detonation rattled their bones. They had learned to measure survival in pauses between impacts. Yet the explosions were not what truly stopped the platoon commander in his tracks. His attention was locked on a tablet glowing in the darkness, displaying a live thermal feed from a reconnaissance drone orbiting 400 meters above the Oskil River crossing. What it revealed made the room feel suddenly very small. 3 separate Russian mechanized formations were advancing west at once. The silhouettes sharpened into armored personnel carriers, T-72B3 tanks, and infantry vehicles stretching nearly a kilometer back into the haze of dawn. There was no ambiguity left. This was not reconnaissance. This was an attempt to seize the city outright. By conventional military logic, the Ukrainian position should have collapsed within minutes. The scale and coordination of the advance suggested overwhelming force, and any unit caught in its path would normally be crushed. Yet what followed would become one of the most damaging reversals Russian forces would suffer on the Kharkiv axis. What appeared to be a breakdown of Ukrainian defenses was, in fact, a carefully shaped withdrawal, one that would evolve into a tightly executed ambush built on deception, timing, and terrain. But before that plan could unfold, the Ukrainians still had to endure the opening moments. Another shell struck nearby, shaking the structure violently as fragments of plaster fell from the ceiling. Moments later, the radio erupted with a strained voice reporting Russian infantry dismounting 800 meters east, advancing through tree lines toward Zapadny. With no hesitation, the platoon commander issued an order that, on the surface, looked like capitulation. His men were to pull back. For weeks, Russian units had been pressing harder around Kupiansk, steadily compressing Ukrainian defenses. Each line had bent without breaking, but the strain was visible. Outside observers were already predicting the city's fall, and Russian command appeared to agree. Intercepted communications later confirmed that Russian battalion groups had been briefed that Kupiansk was effectively neutralized, with Ukrainian resistance reduced to scattered remnants. The coming assault, they believed, would be routine. What they failed to understand was that every block gained and every road taken was drawing them deeper into a space from which withdrawal would soon become impossible. Still, the most urgent danger lay ahead. The 3 advancing columns were converging on a single east-west artery, the main highway feeding directly into Kupiansk's eastern districts. If those formations linked up, armored vehicles would pour straight into the city center, isolating Ukrainian forces and sealing their fate. But the retreat was intentional. Ukrainian squads moved through pre-planned escape routes, collapsed stairwells, drainage tunnels, shattered residential blocks, leaving behind something the Russians could not detect. Hidden throughout the corridor was a web of covert observation teams, all feeding precise targeting data to artillery units stationed several kilometers west. The battlefield was being shaped in real time. At 6:31 hours, the lead vehicles of the 1st Russian column rolled through a ruined intersection that Ukrainian troops had vacated earlier that morning. Overhead, a Ukrainian drone quietly tracked their movement, logging every vehicle, every halt, every command antenna. What followed the armor was just as important. Russian logistics vehicles entered the same corridor, fuel tankers, ammunition trucks, medical carriers, strung out and exposed. Ukrainian gunners now faced a brutal choice: fire immediately and annihilate the supply chain, or wait and risk the armored spearhead disappearing into the city. The margin for error was shrinking by the second. Far to the west, Ukrainian artillery commanders stared at firing solutions they knew could decide the fate of Kupiansk. Activating counter-battery radars would expose their positions, and friendly troops were still close to the kill zone. Strike too early and the Russian advance might disperse. Delay too long and the city would be lost. At the same time, the withdrawing Ukrainian infantry were nearing the edge of danger. Russian troops were advancing faster than anticipated, compressing the timeline. The platoon commander checked the drone feed again. The lead Russian BTR was now 200 meters from the planned strike area. His last fire team was less than 400 meters away from it. He keyed the radio, fully aware of the risk. Phase line Bravo, execute immediately. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Ukraine's two S-7 Pion self-propelled artillery, 203mm behemoths capable of firing shells weighing over 100 kilograms, opened fire from concealed positions near Sheving Cove. The first round slammed into the corridor behind the Russian advance, tearing apart roadways rather than tanks. Within moments, critical intersections were reduced to craters and flame. Russian supply vehicles were cut off, immobilized, or destroyed. This was not a frontal strike. It was a surgical severing of the assault's lifeline. As communications vehicles and fuel trucks burned, Russian coordination began to fracture. Then a second wave of disruption hit. Ukrainian FPV drone teams, concealed inside buildings along the corridor, launched swarms of small attack drones directly into the disorganized columns. Their targets were not the tanks, but the command vehicles, the BTR-80K, carrying the antennas and equipment that held the operation together. One by one, those vehicles were struck, silencing command channels and leaving Russian units isolated and confused. At the same time, a Ukrainian flanking force that had remained hidden north of Kupiansk finally advanced. Their objective was not the city, but the Oskil River crossing the Russians depended on for reinforcement and retreat. The realization came too late for Russian commanders. The city they believed they were capturing had become a trap. By 6:47 hours, the assault was unraveling. The lead Russian company had pushed more than a kilometer into Kupiansk when its battalion command vehicle was destroyed by a drone strike. Communications collapsed. Doctrine called for consolidation and withdrawal, but the routes behind them were already under fire. At 6:49 hours, a Russian tank platoon commander attempted to salvage the situation by pulling his 4 T-72B3 tanks back toward the river crossing. If they reached the bridge first, they could hold it and reopen the corridor. At 6:51 hours, Ukrainian artillery shifted again. A near miss shredded one tank's external fuel tanks, forcing the crew to abandon it as flames spread. 3 tanks remained, racing toward the bridge. The Ukrainian flanking force arrived just in time. A single BMP-2 carrying infantry surged onto the western bank at 6:52 hours. As troops dismounted, the first Russian tank crested a rise 350 meters away. The Ukrainians had one Stugna P missile available. The shot struck true. The tank erupted, its turret blown clear of the hull. The remaining Russian tanks halted, trapped between a defended crossing and destroyed roads. By 6:54 hours, Ukrainian forces controlled the bridge. The encirclement was complete. Inside Kupiansk, the consequences spread rapidly. Russian infantry clearing buildings ran into Ukrainian units that had never fully withdrawn. Streets became kill zones. At 7:03 hours, Russian artillery attempted to intervene, but Ukrainian electronic warfare units jammed communications and delayed fire missions. By 7:38 hours, the outcome was unmistakable. Burned vehicles littered the eastern corridor. 3 T-72B3 tanks were destroyed, others abandoned. Small groups of Russian soldiers began surrendering. By 8:15 hours, Russian command had lost contact with more than 60% of the forces committed to the assault. The fight for Kupiansk continues, and pressure on Ukrainian lines has not disappeared. But the December counterstroke broke something fundamental, the belief that Russian victory here was inevitable. For the soldiers of the 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade, the result was deeply personal. They survived by trusting a plan that demanded retreat under fire and faith in timing over brute force. Kupiansk remained standing, and so did they. Subscribe to join a community dedicated to understanding modern warfare, frontline decision-making, and the realities behind today's conflicts. If this analysis brought value, like the video, to support thoughtful, in-depth discussion and ensure you stay connected to future breakdowns. Stay informed, stay prepared.
Hello everyone.